Welcome to South by Southwest EDU, and thank you so much for joining our session on Back to School at Midlife. I'm Katie Connor. I'm the Executive Director of Stanford's Distinguished Careers Institute, and I've been in this position since July of 2020. Prior to that, I was actually a fellow in the program in the academic year of 2018-19. And prior to that, I ran mentoring and intergenerational learning and career support programs at the University of Colorado Boulder. One of my favorite classes as a DCI fellow was a class called Rock, Sex, and Rebellion, which I think I already knew all the lyrics to the songs in the group. So it was a really fun class.
And I'm Kate Schaefers. I'm Executive Director of University of Minnesota Advanced Careers Initiative. A fun fact about University of Minnesota, one of our graduates is the rapper Dessa, who sings the viral hit about Janet Yellen called Who's Yellin' Now?
And I'm Tom Schreier, and I have the privilege of being the founding director of the Inspired Leadership Initiative at the University of Notre Dame. And my fun fact is that had I not commenced this program 2 years before Katie, I would have been a fellow in the Stanford Distinguished Careers Initiative, or Institute, I should say. And I would have been sitting right beside her as a fellow alumni of that program. So let me kick us off here with a little overview of the movement itself. What if we lived in a world where human longevity was meaningfully extended, and those individuals often had considerable capacity after they finished a chosen career? What if many of those individuals found they lacked direction and purpose, leaving a large underutilized population of talented and accomplished individuals in deep need, in a world that has a deep need for their wisdom, for their talent, and for their experience? Well, we actually do live in that world. And enlightened higher education institutions, led by visionary people, realize that just as colleges and universities can help young people determine their chosen vocation and equip them for it while creating community, it can do the same for those that are in midlife and beyond. Not just episodic extension type courses, but real academic programs with cohorts of fellows that have access to the same classes that the undergraduate and graduate students attend, augmented by custom programming for those fellows. This is the story of how and why these programs emerged at Stanford, the University of Minnesota, and Notre Dame, and other institutions, and how they are impacting not only those fellows, but also those institutions, their students and faculty, and the community, locally and globally. These are programs designed to help accomplished adults discover new passions, discern their mission, and equip them to fulfill their newfound purpose. They are also programs that we believe will help shatter the old model and usher in a new paradigm for higher education. So now let's move to our panel discussion, focusing first on one of the pillars of our program, which we all share, and that is purpose. Kate, one of the things that we've recognized is that in the search for purpose, there's a need for a new roadmap for longer lifespans, support transitions, and internships. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, Tom. You know, our institutions, including higher education, are rooted in outdated assumptions that life follows a sequence of education, work, and leisure. Yet we know that this doesn't reflect the realities today, where lifelong learning is essential across the lifespan, where work and career pivots are routine, and where older adults crave work with meaning and purpose. And we need new models to reflect the way that we're living today, that allow people time for renewal and for retooling at these junctures of their lives to really prepare them for new chapters.
So Katie, what is it about these programs and the cohort structure that helps to support this concept of purpose?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think community and cohort is such a key aspect of all of these programs. As a fellow, I can speak to the fact that one of the most surprising and probably the richest and longest lasting aspect of the program is going to be the community that developed while you were in the program and the support network that you have for your transition and beyond. As a fellow, most of us came to Stanford with large professional and personal networks. We really, frankly, didn't think we needed any new friends. We had plenty of friends, but all of us were very surprised and so happy to find a whole group of new friends in our cohort. I think the immersive nature of these programs where you have a cohort, a group working together with shared goals of discovery and learning and change really created close bonds very, very quickly. And this community and the cohort structure really supports all the other pillars of the program in terms of purpose and wellness. So it was an incredibly valuable aspect of the learning process.
Katie, I think that's wonderful. I mean, we see the linkage here, right, between these three pillars, and wellness being that third pillar is a really powerful pillar for all of us. But another thing that I think you'll all come to understand by the time it's done, we each look at these pillars differently. Some of us are focused on mind, some on body, some on spirit. We all, at some level, are focused on all of them, but in different ways. And that's one of the richnesses of these programs, as is intergenerational and community engagement. And so, Kate, if you don't mind talking a little bit about that pillar, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. So as you heard from all of us, our programs serve fellows. We serve them well. But really the bigger story here is that these fellows being on campus enhances our classrooms and our communities as well. So let's talk about impact. Now, Katie, you had personal experience as a DCI fellow. What was it like to come back to campus and begin as a student again?
Well, it was an eye-opener. It was strange. It was exhilarating, frightening, inspiring. I mean, it was at Stanford, the DCI fellows are non-matriculated graduate students. So we are treated just like other students. We register for classes just like other students and are in those classrooms with them, not as an executive in residence or some expert, but as a fellow student. We can take classes across the university in all of Stanford's 7 schools, engineering, business, law. I took classes across the full spectrum of schools at the university. And I just learned so much from my fellow students. The classroom is so different now, of course, than when I was in college. And it's a much more diverse group of students now, which is really valuable. So just working with students with very, very different backgrounds and experience than myself really supported the learning process and, broadened my perspective on what was possible and what I could do next.
And Tom, part of the story is also the impact on faculty, which you learned from the Notre Dame placing your fellows in the classroom. Can you talk a little bit about what faculty benefited and what they shared with you?
Yeah, it was one of the most amazing and wonderful surprises for us is not only was there this great relationship that developed between the students and our fellows, but also an equally powerful relationship between our faculty and the fellows. And upon reflection, it made great sense. The faculty have these wonderful areas of deep knowledge, and a lot of them want to bring that to the world in a really powerful way. And that's what a lot of our fellows have done. That's just one of the ways I think that we really see this manifest itself in a really incredibly powerful way across the entire institution.
And I also think all of our programs would say that the traditional age students are beneficiaries as well. I know for our program, that's been a huge piece. Tom, what have you heard from traditional age students about what their experiences of having fellows in the class?
They love it. One of my favorite things to do when I'm on campus is walking across campus, walking into the student center and seeing a group of 4 or 5 people. 4 look exactly as you'd expect a student to look. But then there's one person who's a wee bit older, generally has a backpack slung across their back and a sweatshirt on, but they're our age. And the connectivity between them is really powerful, and the shared experience between them is really powerful. one of the great lines that one of the students said to me is, what greater mentor could you have than a non-parental, non-faculty member who's as engaged as you are in what you're doing? And that was really powerful.
Absolutely. Katie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, we actually surveyed over 250 Stanford faculty and had responses from 47% of them that they had a fellow, one or more fellows in their classroom. And from these faculty members, most said, in fact, over 2/3 said that fellows had a very positive impact on the classroom and on their teaching. That fellows came prepared, at least as prepared as the students, and that they very much enriched the quality of classroom discussions. So, we had a really positive response from faculty members as well as students in terms of as Tom mentioned, the mentoring that can go on between students and fellows in terms of that intergenerational learning and engagement. I've seen that power in the mentoring programs at CU and really experienced it firsthand as a DCI fellow. I think but you have both of these populations, students going through a major transition, be it to graduate school or to the professional world, and professionals that are looking to do something different than they may have done for the past 40 years. And, we both bring different skills and experiences to the table that can support the other in helping them with that transition. So it's a great match.
And all of these relationships are so powerful. Katie, you mentioned the cohort itself, the relationships between the faculty and the fellows, between students and our fellows as well. And Katie, DCI has been very intentional about building enduring relationships with your fellows, not only during that fellowship year, but also after that. Can you talk a little bit about what you've done to be purposeful with the Stanford alumni and your fellow networks?
Sure. We have created in the last 2 years, it's really grown a suite of extracurriculars known as DCIX that are intended to engage our alumni as well as our current fellows on projects and in connection with the university with centers and institutes across Stanford. They have a kind of a new saying where DCI, it's more than a year. And it really is. I think we have now over 300 alumni and current and future fellows who are engaged in these DCIX initiatives of some sort. Many of them work on areas for social impact through the Stanford Center for Energy and Sustainability or through our Center for Longevity. There are also groups that work on issues of continuing learning and transition. We have a group working called DCI on Boards to help find board spots for DCI fellows, DCI Writes for the writers of our group, DCI Speaks, and DCI Serves. Additionally, this year, there was a special initiative launched by 2 of our alumni on racial justice and equity in response to just all the violence of the previous year. And this initiative has been conducted purely via technology, purely online. Over 60 fellows are engaged in work groups that are supporting local organizations across the country, addressing everything from educational access to police reform.
So these connections are also with the community and looking at how do you deal with some community needs. And Tom, you also have that with your ILI fellows. Could you mention a little bit of the work that you're doing with human trafficking?
Yeah, one of the beautiful things that emerges very organically from the fellows is not only the pursuit of individual passions when they emerge, but they find collective passions. And we had a group of our fellows from the second cohort that decided that their focus was on eliminating the scourge of human trafficking. And if you think of the power of a group of accomplished individuals from different backgrounds, like legal and business and international development, coming together on something like that, it's really amazing. And that's one of the beauties of all of our programs, and also the work we do together, is we get to share these kinds of things and help to facilitate that work, which hopefully has a meaningful, positive social impact.
Yeah, and for us at University of Minnesota, that community piece is key. Our fellows do internships for lack of a better word, in nonprofits. So they work on projects that are serving a community need. And so we have built that right in. And, as all of our programs have shown, that's a key piece of connecting people with purpose. So let me turn it over to Katie to talk a little bit about strategies and best practices.
All right. Thanks, Kate. So you've heard about why these programs are particularly important and critical now with the changing demographics. Also about what is some key components of all of them, what they have in common. The cohort, the community focus on purpose and wellness. So the next thing we'd like to talk a little bit about is how. If you wanted to launch one of these programs for yourself, how could you get started? So Tom, you have very recent experience with this, or relatively recent, at Notre Dame, where you were lured away from DCI to launch your own program there. So perhaps you could share a little bit about your origin story and what were the keys to success.
I would love to. And I would say, though I was lured away from Stanford, I was lured away with the promise, which was delivered on beautifully, of collaboration. And I think that's a spirit that I hopefully sense from the three of us as we talk here today. And it's very powerful. But I did plan to head off to Palo Alto and to enroll in the Stanford program. Went to drop our daughter off as a freshman at Notre Dame. Ran into a very good friend of mine and classmate who was a vice president, who instead convinced me to create a program that had carried a lot of the spirit of the DCI program, but that was distinctively part of the Notre Dame ethos. And that's, I think, something which is very, very true of these programs, is that there are common threads that you'll pick up across, like the principles, but also very distinctive characteristics that come across all three.
Okay, so Kate, perhaps you could tell us about how your experience was different at a large public university and how you managed to get your program up and running.
Yeah, so we launched as a pilot, and we invited a small group of fellows to help us co-create. We were allowed to experiment and to learn as we went along. And so we also then looked at where could we find some pockets of openness to this idea. So we recruited some faculty who liked the idea about welcoming fellows into their classroom. We built on successes. We then told those stories of impact, not just with regards to our fellows, but also how the faculty experienced the fellows in the class, and then the impact on our students. And so we built as we went along. We didn't have many resources to begin with, so we were intentional about building on existing resources and building on what we could start at with a small launch. Now, the downside of our quiet launch, though, is that now we're still struggling with some visibility, both internally and externally. We are also, being a public university, committed to keeping our costs low, which also does constrict us with regards to what we can do and the means that we have to do our programming. So we're still trying to figure out the sustainability and how to manage just the business side of it, but also keeping what we're doing affordable.
Sure. So you both talked about champions and leadership as being key factors to your success, as well as starting small. Did you get it right the first time, or what have you learned and changed as you've gone and since you've launched? Tom, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I'll just jump in, and I think you've hit on the key points. I would say there's a couple of things that are really important to successful launch. The first is that you do have a champion, somebody who is willing to devote a meaningful component of their life to making this happen, to bringing this to life, and then getting as much internal support and advocacy as you can. And then doing what we call co-creation. And that is not expecting that it's going to be perfect on day one, but recruiting your first cohort in the spirit of co-creation, and hopefully keeping that as you move from your first to your second cohort and beyond, so that the program evolves as you bring in new fellows and as the times evolve and the needs of the world evolve that your fellows are going to address.
Great. What about you, Kate?
Yeah, and just to add to that too, I do think you need an internal champion. And for us, I worked with our founding director, Professor Phyllis Moen, who has great credibility on campus and was able to open some doors for us. And then our provost also was supportive in us experimenting with this. And so, there's so many moving balls with something like this, but it does take a concerted effort and working with what you already have in your institution.
Okay. All right. So just for somebody getting started, perhaps you could talk a little bit about if you have a target enrollment, what it is, and if there's any tips for reaching this demographic. Kate, would you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think there's got to be this push and pull between size. Small is really good because you want to have a cohort that you can build out those relationships with. So we're thinking around 25 would be ideal. We're still trying to figure out how to get there. And I think, too, as we think about our recruitment, we've been using a lot of social media, but I think reaching out to alumni is another great strategy.
Okay, Tom?
Yeah, we started smaller. Our first two cohorts were 15 by design. We expect to grow to 25 to 30. And the idea there was that with 15, we could manage through, in particular, those kind of logistical things that come along with bringing an entirely new audience to a university. And then once that we had some experience with that, we could then bring it to a larger group. I think there's also a magic to not getting too large because you want this cohort to be very strong. And once you cross a certain threshold, I believe that becomes more difficult to do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you both. Yeah, Stanford started, our first cohort was in 2015, and we had 24 fellows in that cohort. And our fellows are also, many of them bring their partners as members of the program as well. So early years, we had 25 to 30, and recently we've upped it just a little bit to about 35 to 40-ish, a little over 40 total fellows and partners in the program. And that just seems like a real sweet spot in terms of small enough, diverse enough. It's you can create those really close connections with that size of group, and any bigger gets a little more challenging. So I guess just in summary, you all have heard about how distinct our programs are and how they've all adapted to fit the cultures of the institutions and the communities that we serve. These programs are definitely not a one-size-fits-all proposition. And they've all been through this process and continue to evolve and iterate as we learn and grow over time. They all, though, have these commonalities of a cohort-based approach and leveraging intergenerational learning to support purpose and community and wellness in our own unique settings. This year in particular has really been a period of incredible change in higher ed in general, and our programs are no different than that. I think we've all learned to adapt to using technology to stay connected to our communities and to continue to engage them, as well as to improve access and opportunity to others that maybe were not able to be on campus. So I think while these are all campus-based programs and will likely stay that way, we're learning that technology could really be used perhaps to support broader access to different demographics interested in these types of programs at other institutions. And we have been reaching out and working with and collaborating with community colleges and non-residential programs, hopefully in the future. So while these programs are just the first wave, we hope many others will join us in this and in these types of initiatives and really help expand learning throughout the lifespan to be part of the university of the future. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kate.
And the time is now to shatter some of these old ideas of what it means to be a student and to recognize the value of people at Midlife and beyond that they bring to our campuses. And as we look at that, how do we need to redesign higher education to better reflect the realities of today's world? Now, we all know it's not easy to innovate in higher education, and that's why it's so critically important to connect change leaders who are forging new pathways in their institutions so that we can learn from each other, to share best practices, and to help shine a light on what is possible in this space. And I have to speak for myself, and I'm sure Tom and Katie would also say this, but the relationships that we've formed across institutions have been invaluable as we've launched our programs. And so as you think about your program, your institution and what might fit, We just invite you to reach out to all of us. We're happy to talk about our experiences and help build relationships. And we also invite you to join a new collaborative that we have formed called the Nexel Collaborative. This is a group of like-minded institutions where we share ideas, best practices, resources, and eventually some longitudinal research. You can join us by looking at our website, and we will be having an event in April. We hope you can join us for that as well. So thank you so much for coming to our session. Thank you.